I am still sick. However, life does go on. I want to talk about Queer. Today I will actually be watching the movie by Luca Guadagnino. I'm looking at the spelling on my computer. I'll be watching the 2024 movie with Daniel Craig. And I really unexpectedly have been really sucked into the writing by William Burroughs. So I had never read this author, and I only read this because of the film that was coming out, shame on me, with Daniel Craig. That being said, if anybody has seen Daniel Craig and like the whodunit sort of stuff that he's doing recently, I read this entire book hearing Daniel Craig's southern accent. I don't think the trailers that I've seen of Queer have had any audio. I have no idea what Daniel Craig is going to sound like. I don't know what Allerton is supposed to sound like. So I'm really curious about the experience that this movie is going to give me. That being said, I did finish reading this while I was sick and had like severe brain fog, which probably doesn't, or it may. It does something to the way that I understood this book. Queer is, according to Burroughs, the withdrawal of William Lee. So the non-linear, non-traditional narrative is kind of taken to the next level with the withdrawal symptoms of William Lee. This isn't as extreme as apparently what Naked Lunch is, which I am now going to read, but the brain fog that I had because I was sick only kind of exacerbated the hallucinogenic stream of consciousness style writing that William Burroughs is known for, his very experimental writing. I also didn't know anything about the beat movement. I didn't know anything about 40s, 50s queer culture, which seems strange, but this book comes with a lot of extra context. So you get the text itself, you get an introduction by Oliver Harris, who is a Burroughs scholar, and then you get the intro that Burroughs himself wrote in 1985. I will absolutely say that this book made way more sense regarding the two introductions after I read the actual text. I only say that because I'm not familiar with William Burroughs, so the introduction was a little abstract in his life because it comments on his life, it comments on his perspectives, it comments on him as an author, as him as a person, as him as William Lee. And there's so much, because this says semi-autobiographical, there is so much of William Burroughs and William Lee that is synonymous with each other. The introductions were a little difficult for me to follow. However, after reading the text of Queer, it was very enlightening and much easier. This book also helped me find a happy medium between no annotation and some annotation. Because while I want to read these books, to full-blown annotate the way that I typically do would be extremely time-consuming. And while I think this book merits it, I don't want to invest that level of time into every single thing that I read. But reading this book without any annotations, I think did a disservice for me as a reader. So I found the medium by highlighting. So when I went back to read the intro, I started highlighting. I went back to reread his intro, that is the appendix to this version, and I started highlighting. I went back and I highlighted the falling apart of William Lee, especially after he meets Allerton, and just the sadness and the self-hatred, the self-loathing, the self-laceration, the just poignant defeat that faces William Lee at every single turn. This is a multi-layer narrative. This isn't just the story of William Lee. It's not just the story of William Burroughs. It's not just a story set in Mexico City, Mexico, generic version of Mexico that Burroughs envisions. There is so much more going on that thankfully the introduction kind of brings to light, since I wasn't exactly aware of the political scene of the 40s and 50s pertaining to the queer culture. There's text, there's parallels that are drawn, there's parallels drawn among the different books. I also was wondering if the trilogy of this was Junkie, Queer, and Naked Lunch, it's supposed to be the Yage letters, which I already reserved at the library. I'm curious where Naked Lunch lies, since apparently William Lee features as a character in 3 of his shorter experimental pieces, which I will also be reading. I think I got a Williams Burroughs reader, and I think one of the stories is in there. So I'm fascinated with William Lee as a character, less so because of the autobiographical part of William Burroughs, more so because of what he's telling his readers in the 50s. William Lee is speaking directly to queer men and women of the 40s and 50s and 60s. And his fall, his succumbing to the self-loathing that was prevalent not only in the literature, but the culture at the time, is harrowing and very haunting. And I'm sad as a reader. I am the audience that William Burroughs, that William Lee, that these junkies needed. I am the audience that they were desperately seeking validation from. And it puts me in a really sad position as a reader to witness this character just suffering loneliness, suffering all of these things that thankfully we are at a point where, you know, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. At the time, queer people were not. And to see it so prevalent, not only in this book, but per the introduction and other sources, prevalent in the, you know, every gay story has a tragic ending, as a means of atonement, as a means of penance that every queer person subliminally felt because of the prevalent culture at the time, is really sad. So not only is William Lee sad as a character, and Allerton is so complicated. Like, I don't know how I feel about Allerton. I have to unpack Allerton. But not only is William Lee sad as a character, what he represents as a character on a grander scale is even sadder. So I'm really curious how this non-linear, non-traditional, experimental book is going to be converted into a film medium. There was a 2000 adaptation of Queer, which I have to now go watch as well. But Luca Guadagnino is so creative and such a masterful storyteller. I am extremely curious to see his adaptation, his creative liberties in this really experimental text. So I'm going to be watching that today, and I'll be vlogging about it afterwards, and then I'll probably have a 2-part video specifically to address the book and specifically to address the film. I've gone down a William Burroughs rabbit hole, and it was extremely unexpected, especially because I was struggling with the fact that one of the biggest things he's known for is the fact that he accidentally shot his wife during a drunken just escapade. And I was struggling with, can I read books by this person? But because of the importance of these texts in queer literature, I found myself just drawn, and I think William Lee as a tragic character just sucked me in. And now I'm here and I have like 6 books on hold at the library. This was definitely an unexpected rabbit hole. I figured this would be a cool text to read. I didn't expect me to go and try to buy his entire bibliography. Really excited about this one. And I'll be watching the movie, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm watching it with a friend who hasn't read the book and I don't think is familiar with like A24 movies or William Burroughs. So that's gonna be interesting to see someone just coming in like cold turkey to this kind of experience. And I'm so curious about Allerton. I'm less curious about Allerton from a like autobiographical perspective. Like, I don't care to draw parallels between William Lee, William Burroughs, and Allerton, and A.L.M. Mercer, I believe. I don't care to do that. Was it Mercer? Adelbert Lewis. I don't care to draw those parallels. I will inevitably, because of the text, because of what these books are. I want to understand Allerton within the context of queer a little separated from William Burroughs. I know what William Burroughs is trying to tell us with Lee and Allerton. I know that the conclusion of the relationship parallels, sort of. I know that the conclusion of the relationship between him and Lewis slightly different than the ending here, because this one has a little more hope in its sad way than the real life relationship. But I want to see what Luca Guadagnino, I'll eventually know how to say his name if I say it enough, saw in Allerton and how Allerton is depicted. Because of I felt like Allerton was like sarcastic and also was struggling with his own self-loathing. I don't think that he disliked Lee. I think that because Lee was going through withdrawals and Allerton seemed sober as all hell, I think Allerton had his wits about himself versus Lee was just unraveling the entire time and desperate to have something hold him together. The junk was no longer there to hold him together, even though Burroughs was still on the junk while writing Queer, but he needed something to hold him together, and that something was Allerton and his attention. So I'm curious to see what the director did. Director? Yes, the director. And yeah, I can ramble about this. I have to put my thoughts together because of the multi-layer narrative that this is and because of the non-linear experimental text that this is. So those are going to be fun. I will probably be reading a script for those, not just like going off the top of my head. Otherwise we'll be here forever. But I'll be watching the movie later today and I'm really excited. I will definitely update after I watch the movie. Okay. Sporting my Medici University sweatshirt, which I love because it's cool now. Again. And I'm not sick. Sort of. Still dealing with some coughs, but I think we're on the up. I did watch Queer with Daniel Craig by Luca. I'm just gonna pull up his name and stop pretending like I'll know how to say it. Luca Guadagnino, for reference. It is a film adaptation of the book by the same name by William S. Burroughs. This is going to be pretty stream of consciousness for me, and I'll have a more put together video for both the book as well as like the film companionship with the book later this week. Going into the film Queer, I had some pretty high expectations. Not only was it an A24 film, it was also directed by the great Luca Guadagnino. Eventually, by the end of this vlog, I'll be able to say his name. Luca Guadagnino has a really beautiful artistic view. A24 films very rarely disappoint, and we were working with some psychedelic content as it is. Pretty much recipe for success. And it delivered. It delivered, and then some. I watched this film with a friend. She knew that the book was stream of consciousness. She knew Luca Guadagnino's work, and she's like, oh my god, James Bond is playing a gay guy. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't really watch those movies, so I don't associate Daniel Craig with that. But yes, she's like, let's do this. Every moment of anxiety, every moment of secondhand embarrassment, every moment of pity, sadness, and just poignant loss, confusion is exponentially felt and portrayed in the film. You read that Lee is like being awkward and drunk and making a spectacle of himself with the routine throughout the book, seeing it as he's trying desperately to find a human connection, because that is ultimately what he is seeking, and watching him fail over and over again is really difficult. My experience with the film differed from my friends in that I already knew how it ended. I knew what Lee needed. I knew what he sought. I already knew Allerton, and I knew how standoffish he was. Versus my friend who was asking, I'm sensing control. I'm sensing violence. I'm getting the feeling of indifference. And I knew all of that based on the book. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what's happening here. Lee is desperate. Lee is trying to impose his will on Allerton. Lee is trying to impose his will on the world at large, to desperately find a connection with someone, something meaningful. And the fact that she was able to grasp that from some pretty unexpected places was really telling of how masterfully this film was executed. My feelings now. As I was watching the film, I was hearing the book. There are such poignant lines that are taken directly from the book. Some lines that are haunting. There are also lines that deviate from the book. I saw the director's creativity, his vision, his artistic interpretation of the blank space that this narrative left. Because Queer, I was struggling with Allerton because of how it's written. Allerton is a very sarcastic, standoffish character, and that comes through in the film very successfully. And so Allerton will say something, but there's no descriptor. I don't know if he's saying this smiling. I don't know if he's saying this and Lee laughs. So there's so much space here to work with and to fill, and every moment of the film filled that space, and some of the creative liberties that were taken enhanced the text. I also obviously knew how the book ended. I knew that this semi-autobiographical text ended differently than the relationship it was actually based on. The film ends differently than the relationship and differing differently from the book. To see the conclusion of the film and the heartbreaking take that Luca Guadagnino took on this film, I was just, my mouth was on the floor, like just agape. I was distraught. I was struggling to just process that Luca gave us the closure that this book didn't get, and that William Burroughs himself never got either. And seeing that creative liberty, seeing the narrative, seeing the characters support the changes because of the creative differences, I loved how the cast of characters came into their own, and the supporting cast, even though they were there for a few moments, added such poignant perspective that me as the viewer was feeling, and that the characters needed, and ultimately made their life choices. I loved the film. It was as trippy as the book, as symbolic as the book. It was so exceptionally well done. And I know that the biggest question I had going into the film was, what is Allerton's angle? And my friend also had that question. She's like, what's Allerton's motivation? Because clearly he's curious. Clearly he's like, yeah, I'll play with you, but I'm not gonna dedicate and commit. And that comes through very clearly and very well in the film. And because I'm able to see the body language, I'm able to hear the inflection of the voices, the tones, I'm able to see the facial expressions and the mannerisms that everybody talks in, I'm able to get a better picture of the book itself and a better picture of Allerton. And then just towards the end, when my world was collapsing, when Luca Guadagnino just hit the nail in the coffin, and then I turned to my friend and I'm like, I have been searching for Allerton as much as Lee has. Like, I went into this film looking for Allerton's personality, for Allerton's motivation, his angle. I wanted to know him and know what he wanted out of Lee, even though, come to find out, oh, I'm coughing. He's in it for the fun, right? Clearly, that's how it goes, where it doesn't end well. And he's in it for the curiosity, right? But that wasn't a satisfactory answer enough to me. It only at the end dawned on me, I can't see a clear picture of Allerton. I can't see into Allerton's head, first of all, because we're with William Lee. And second of all, because this book, Allerton, is based on Adelbert Lewis M. So the actual guy that William Burroughs himself was trying to woo and swoon. William Burroughs never made it with Mercer. He never was able to reach him, even with Yage, even with everything. He was never able to make that connection with Lewis. I'm gonna call him Lewis. That connection was never established. Lewis, for all Burroughs knows, for all I know, was a persona of who he really was. So Burroughs, and by extension William Lee, can only give us what they see through their withdrawal, what they see through their drug addiction, their hallucinations, what they perceive, what they're projecting. Because at the end of the day, Allerton is so Lewis Allerton. The character is so, he's such an enigma. He's so barricaded and just closed off from Lee and from us as the viewers, as the readers, that we never see him and we never find him and know him because Burroughs didn't. And because Burroughs didn't, William Lee therefore could never either. And we get a glimpse of that in the creative liberties that Luca Guadagnino took. And those glimpses are tragic and they're sad and they break my heart. And I love it. I mean, I went into this expecting a broken heart. I got it. It delivered. I realized I will never know Allerton because Burroughs never knew Lewis. And therefore Lee will never know Allerton because Lee never reaches him. Because Lee, no matter what, is never able to make that connection. This random Yage psychedelic plant telepathic escapade that we go on, that William Burroughs himself actually went on. What do you mean you're going to the Ecuadorian jungle looking for a psychedelic plant? But he did it. The question throughout the entire film is posed to William Lee by everybody. He's like, do you have Yage? Do you have Yage? Do you know where I can get Yage? I will give you a pretty penny for some Yage. And everyone's like, who are you trying so desperately to communicate with? Because when they ask him what he wants, he's like, that's not gonna get you high, you druggie. William Lee says, I'm not looking for the high, I'm looking for the telepathy. And they ask him, who are you trying so desperately to talk to? And that question was heartbreaking because he knew it was Allerton. He knew that he needed to talk to him. He needed to somehow give him his feelings, and he needed to hear and know back what Allerton also felt. And the film gives me the bitter, tragic closure that the book didn't, that Burroughs never got. And it was really the question. I think that was the question of this whole book. Who are you trying to talk to? That is what we're trying to answer. That is what we're that's what we're seeking. That is what we spend 100 pages trying to locate in Mexico City, in the slums, with the prostitutes, with the booze, with the drugs. We're trying to find a meaningful connection, and we don't get it. Lee never gets it for multiple reasons, but the heartbreak isn't lessened just because, you know, Lee also has his own problems. It just makes it that much more tragic because it's this vicious cycle. He will continue on this self-destructive path because of that lack of connection. He will never get that connection because of his self-destruction. I loved the film. I loved the creative liberties that were taken. I loved that I could follow it, that it was so true, that there was just delectable quotes out of the book, that there were these desperate moments of, I could feel Lee desperately trying to hold on to anything for Allerton. And Allerton, I don't think he's a villain. I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he had his own stuff and he just wasn't as broken as Lee. And I have become obsessed with William Lee. He is like a common thread in a lot of Burroughs' works, not only because Burroughs used that as a pseudonym for a minute, but because he's just a main character in a couple of the books. I put all of Burroughs' bibliography that is available at my library on hold, and I will go get it, and I will read it. I might not read it as detailed. I need to know junkie, queer, And the Yage letters, which apparently is the third book in this trilogy, I thought it was Naked Lunch. No, it's not, because Naked Lunch is derived off a quote from here, which also broke my damn heart. I need to know what happened in Junkie. Even if it's like at a high level, even if I have to come back later to really dive in, like I need a Burroughs month, right? Maybe next year. I need to know his bibliography. I need to know William Lee. And I never will, and I know that. But I still want to try to find him. The way he was finding Allerton, the way he was trying to find himself, but he never could. I was ranting about this to so many people. Probably is why I haven't gotten better. But this book was so tiny and it packed such a wallop. And I loved it. So good. I have a structure in mind of what I want the next two videos to be, because there's so much to unpack. And I am not a Burroughs academic. I'm not a student of the Beat era. I'm not a student of the 40s and 50s. I am an amateur, like, queer historian, but I live like 1600s and earlier, not the 50s. So I won't be able to comment on the political aspects, on what was happening at the time that Burroughs was like just trying his best to be like, how dare you? So in my book, I'm gonna say the state, and it's aimed at this person. It's aimed at this movement. It's aimed at this law that's passed that criminalizes this love. I can't comment on it because I just don't have that like knowledge. I can comment on Burroughs because of this amazing intro by Oliver Harris, and I can comment on the narrative itself and what William Lee is now to me, which is like a creepy uncle, but it's okay. That's the end of this vlog. I loved it. This is the first book I finished in 2025. I didn't expect it to be, and I didn't expect it. I knew I would like it. I didn't know. I figured I would. I'm like, can't be that bad. I didn't think it would impact me the way that it did. And there's been a couple surprises on, like, over my break. Like, what? Like, whoa, where did that come from? This is definitely one of them. And I'm now more well-versed in, like, the history of homosexual texts, the history of queer literature and queer culture. So I'm really happy about that, especially in America. This book was just so surprising in so many ways. So I loved it. I'll be doing a full book talk video about queer. I'll be doing another like film talk. I don't know, just film. I'll be doing kind of a side-by-side of the movie and the book. They will be spoiler free. No secret, this doesn't end well on any front. That's about the only thing I'm gonna say. But I do want to talk about the film and the book itself. So I will catch you guys in that video. If you read this book, tell me what you thought. If you've read his other books, tell me what you thought. I will have a conversation about it. I love this book, so I will happily have a conversation about this. And if anyone is a Burroughs expert, tell me what I missed. Tell me what Oliver Harris doesn't cover in the 15 pages that he gets. So let me know. Can't wait to talk about this. Catch you next time. Bye.